my typical gift to you prior to a test, which is this list of how many items are going to come from each of the chapters that will be covered on that test. So test number 2 is when? Next Tuesday. Good. So get that on the radar, right? 9 questions on sensation and perception. Sensation was the recorded lecture that is still there on a button on Blackboard that you guys were responsible for reviewing after test number 1. Perception was the yellow slides that we did together in here face-to-face. 9 questions on that. Consciousness, which was a one-day, one online session chapter, is 7 questions. That was sleep, dreams, and drugs and alcohol. Learning is what we're going to finish up this morning. It's 15 out of 40, which is 3 out of 8, which is more than a third of test number 2 here. So that's what you want to weight more heavily when you budget your study time. And then memory will be 9 questions. Okay, and that's what we're going to transition into. We'll spend about 20 to 25 minutes finishing up learning, and then we'll spend the remaining time talking about memory. Okay, same deal, 40 questions, same par score answer sheet that you need to bring with you. All the other things procedurally will be the same as they were for test number 1. Any questions about that breakdown or anything regarding test number 2 now? Make sure you get here on time. Remember, we start at 9:30. If you show up later than 9:55, then you get a 0. I don't give you a test if you show up that late because, as you guys saw with test number 1, by 25 minutes in, we have 25 or 30 people who are done. Okay? All right. What am I going to recommend that you do to help you prepare for test number 2? Is anybody going to say it? SI, so supplemental instruction, is this resource available to you guys? You've got the button here that says supplemental instruction. Let me just sell it to you this way, this week. This week right now, between now and next Tuesday, is the single most important week that if you're going to go to one of these tons of sessions, this is the time to do it. And here's why I'm saying that. Not only is it a lot of material on learning that people struggle with, these guys have I'm pointing this way because I know a number of them are sitting over here. These guys have a ton of resources that they've put together to help you with the learning section. More importantly, what we know very clearly from the fall is that people who struggled on test 1 and still didn't go to SI before test 2 and then finally went before test 3, they had dug themselves so big of a hole that they couldn't recover. And they couldn't get back to C or better in the class, and they ended up having to retake the course or just have their D or F. Okay? So it's the most important week because this is the point at which there's still enough time that even if you did poorly on test 1, if you go to SI and do better on test 2, and you continue in that positive direction, and you're coming to class and getting clicker points, and you're doing the learning curve quizzes for homework, you can overcome one bad test grade. When you have 2 big clunkers, you're in trouble, okay? And so that's why I like to say this is the single most important week for you guys to get going to the SI sessions, all right? Have I sold that well enough? I'm not going to get a bonus if more people go, but it's going to help your grades. One final announcement. This is my palm to the forehead moment from last week. How many of you guys got a text at 10:38 last week, 5 minutes before we finished? How many of you got the emergency text about there being an active shooter last 2? Okay, so note to students, if you get one of those, you have to tell me. I'm not checking my text while I'm reading, while I'm teaching. I get done, I check the text, I'm like, awesome, I just sent 400 plus people out to get shot at. Okay, so, I guess I have to spell this out in the syllabus now. If there's like a true emergency like that, and I don't know, and you're sitting there, and I know you've got them out between your knees or on your lap or whatever, you need to let me know, right? Because I read this, I'm like, Jesus. And like the students are coming in for the next class, I'm like, is there something going on? They're like, yeah, well, somebody's got a gun somewhere near campus. I'm like, well, I just let 400 people leave to go get shot at because nobody told me. So I need you to tell me if that happens. It's mind-boggling to me that I have to tell you, but please, right? I don't need other announcements. I don't need you to tell me, like, your boyfriend got accepted to wherever, or your girlfriend's breaking up with you, or other emergencies that might come. But something like that, can you please let me know? All right, cool. That's that. I want to circle back before we finish up the learning section and move on to memory to a couple of the big points here from what we were talking about. And it's not this slide that I want to begin with. I actually want to begin with this slide. Because as I told the 8 o'clock class, if I were to give you guys one slide that I think would let you show at least a basic understanding of the different types of learning, it would be this one. If you had 2 minutes to explain the 3 types of learning, you should be able to do it with this slide. Okay? Now, obviously, there's a ton of stuff to be added about classical conditioning. And there's a ton of stuff to be added about operant conditioning. Different forms of reinforcement and punishment and shaping and some other stuff that we talked about. But this is, a very brief set of talking points on each of the major forms of learning here. Where we're going today is we're going to finish up the section by talking about observational learning. Learning via imitation is sometimes called social learning. Okay, that's where we're headed. I want to take a couple minutes to hit high points on operant conditioning, and I want to do 1, 2, 3 clicker questions on operant conditioning to make sure you guys know what you really, honestly, you just need to know. All right, so we began by talking about the rat in the Skinner box. This slide is hugely important. The SI leaders will tell you from this slide and the next slide on punishment, that's probably like 5 questions on the test. Okay, so what's the take-home message here about reinforcement? The first take-home message is, what does reinforcement always do? Increases the likelihood of the behavior occurring, right? So when it's positive reinforcement, it just means the mechanism through which you get the person to do more is you present them with something, right? So I use positive reinforcement in this class to get you to show up. What do I give you? I give you clicker points. Let's be honest. If I wasn't given clicker points, I wouldn't have 420 people in here, 440 people in here. Okay? And I know because I used to not use clickers and I get 210, 230 showing up. Okay? So I have increased the frequency of the showing up for class behavior by using positive reinforcement in the form of giving you points for being here and for participating. Negative reinforcement is the number one stumbling block, not only in this section, in the entire course. What do people mix this up with? They mix it up with punishment. It is not punishment because, you know what? It's the opposite of punishment. Reinforcement, and in this case negative reinforcement, makes the behavior more likely to occur. What does punishment do? Makes it less likely to occur. So they actually have opposite effects here. With negative reinforcement, it's the mechanism that's confusing. The mechanism is you learn to do something more because in doing that behavior, you avoid, you reduce, you eliminate something that you don't like. Okay? So those verbs, avoid, remove, or eliminate, are very commonly seen in examples related to negative reinforcement. So on the slide here, you clean the room and the nagging stops. Okay? When we were online, we talked about you get in the car and the dashboard flashes and beeps at you until you put your seatbelt on. So you learn that if I put this on, that will stop. Okay? We're going to talk about negative reinforcement when we get to the section on anxiety disorders. There's an awesome example of negative reinforcement there. How many of you guys have ever heard of OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder? A lot of you have. Okay? Here's the really cool thing about OCD, is that it's related to negative reinforcement. The way it's related is if somebody's really obsessed with germs, what happens to their anxiety level when they're out and about and might be surrounded by germs is their anxiety level goes through the roof. And here it is. My anxiety level is extremely high. If I have OCD, my compulsion to deal with the anxiety about those germs is going to be to do what? What am I going to do? I'm probably going to wash my hands. Do you know what happens to the anxiety after I wash my hands? What does it do? It goes way down. What is that? That's relief in the form of negative reinforcement, right? I'm relieving the anxiety. I'm reducing, I'm eliminating maybe down to zero the anxiety by doing that behavior. That's negative reinforcement again, okay? Two forms of punishment always lead to less of the behavior. We talked about positive punishment. So you scold someone for doing something that you don't want them to do. If that behavior decreases in frequency, that's a good example of positive punishment. We talked about pros and cons there. You should check out the recording if you haven't already done so, where we discuss that. Negative punishment is you lose something. Again, it's not negative in the sense of bad. It's negative in the sense of something being subtracted out or taken away. You lose cell phone privileges. You lose computer privileges. You get a timeout. You're not allowed to play with the other kids. Those are all examples of negative punishment, right? Where you're losing access to something as a function of behavior that we want to see you stop doing, right? So you kick your sibling, I take away your favorite toy. Okay? That's being removed in that case. Any questions about those four things right there? Like, how important is that for the test? She's just nodding. Yes. Yes, you want to know all that, okay? Because I ask lots of questions, not only because it's a key set of ideas for this part of the course, but as we go forward, it's going to be important. And I also think it's important because, like I said, if you're going to be a parent, a teacher, a coach, a boss, or like interact with other human beings, you're going to do these things. And you're going to want to know how to get things done in terms of either increasing or decreasing the frequency of behaviors. It's really very simple, okay? All right. What else did we talk about here? Well, we did this question. We did that one. We talked about shaping. I think this is pretty simple. If I had to pick, two words on the slide to help you remember shaping, I would just pick the two words baby steps, right? What we do with shaping is we use rewards that are steps along the way towards the final ultimate target behavior. Here's what I want you to do, and I know that's not going to happen right away, but what I can do is sort of nudge you and guide you toward that by rewarding the steps that move in that direction. The example we used online was, you're trying to help your 3 or 4-year-old learn to make their bed perfectly. If you just wait for that to happen spontaneously, you could be waiting for like 20 years. Okay? What we want to do is nudge them in the right direction by rewarding those baby steps in the right direction. All right. We're going to do this one as a clicker question because we did it online, and I want to reward people who were there online or who viewed the recording. So what's the deal here? I don't want that to show up. It always does. Positive reinforcement. What does it do to the rate of responding? Negative reinforcement. What does it do to the rate of responding? And I've got 2 more that we're going to do here as we review operant conditioning, and then we'll talk about observational learning. All right, let's see. Wow, that's really good. Not that I like to compare my classes, but let's say the 8 o'clock class just didn't do as well on that one as you guys did. Reinforcement always does what? Increases the frequency of behavior. Good, you got it. All right. How about this one? Which one of these is not an example of punishment? 3 are punishment, 1 is not. Find the one that's not. And then after you get it right, look at the 3 that are punishment and figure out what kind of punishment they are. That's good practice for what you're going to do next Tuesday. You guys did well again. What is D? What kind of operant conditioning scenario is that? Negative reinforcement, right? Because you take the medication, what happens to your headache? It goes away. Okay, what's A? Is it punishment or reinforcement? Punishment. So that's the approach to any of these questions, right? Figure out whether it's punishment or reinforcement, okay? Looks like they want to get you to stop doing whatever you did that was related to failing the algebra test, and they take something away. What kind of punishment is that? Negative punishment. What's B? Positive punishment. I'm going to get you to stop showing up late by presenting you with extra sprints to do after practice. C is also positive punishment. I'm going to get you to stop doing that by presenting you with the yellow card for doing something that I didn't want to see you do. We talked about primary versus secondary reinforcers. The basic distinction was whether the reinforcers were biologically relevant or not. Okay? The secondary reinforcers are ones that in and of themselves are not directly satisfying or directly relevant to a biological need. So money doesn't directly satisfy those needs. Obviously, you could exchange it for food or water or whatever. Okay, that was the distinction we made between primary and secondary reinforcers. Then we talked about reinforcement schedules, and we made a distinction between ratio and interval schedules. So the approach to these questions, and there'll be 2 or 3 of these, would involve deciding as you look at the question whether the reinforcement is being given based on the number of times that they did something, or is it based on the passage of time? If it's number of times that they did something, it's fixed ratio, right? If I'm in first grade and I get a bonus grab into the grab bag, reward bag on Friday, if I did my homework 3 straight times that week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, either way, if you do it 3 straight times, then you get a reward. It's a fixed ratio. I had to do it 1, 2, 3 times to get that reward. Right? Variable ratio is the woman playing the slot machine. If she's pressing on the button there, she's not all that different from the rat in the Skinner box. And she gets rewarded maybe on average every 4th or 5th pull or 4th or 5th play of the slot machine. That's variable ratio. It's not exactly every 4th or 5th time, but it averages out to that over time. So that's the number of responses. Interval schedules, things like working a job where you get paid every 2 weeks. That's a fixed interval schedule. Okay? It's a set amount of time that if you work during that interval, you get paid at the end of that period of time. Okay? The next 2 weeks begin. You work during that time, you get paid after that 2-week period has elapsed. Variable interval is a variable amount of time. I think I used the example of waiting for a good wave if you're a surfer. Maybe over the course of 2 hours out there, you have 10 good waves. Well, 120 minutes divided by 10 good waves. It's about every 12 minutes, but it's not exactly every 12 minutes, right? If you're the owner of a small business, maybe your paycheck isn't exactly every 2 weeks. Maybe it's a variable amount of time. Maybe you get paid every 3rd or 5th week, or sometimes it might be 8 weeks. Maybe there's 2 weeks in a row when you get paid if the business is really booming. You'll be getting paid on a variable interval schedule in that case. Okay, maybe it averages out to every 2 or 3 weeks, but it's not exactly that interval. All right. And then let's do this one. We didn't do this one. We have one example of reinforcement schedules that we did. I'll show you that question, but we won't do it again. This one, the points that you're given for responding correctly to this question are good examples of which of the following? Are they primary reinforcers, secondary reinforcers, tertiary reinforcers, or pity points? Alrighty, let's take a look. I got 7 people to pick tertiary reinforcers, and I totally made that up, so that's good. These are secondary reinforcers. Why? They're not directly biologically relevant, right? You're not like, oh, I just got 2 points for getting that right, and I feel less hungry now. Feel a lot better, right? So it's not that. All right. And then we did this question. I'm not going to redo it with you with the clickers, but take a look at it, right? We have a woman who's getting paid, what, $18 for every 3 pages. That's the key part. If I had to circle part of it, I'd circle that, right? $18 for every 3 pages. So is it ratio or is it interval? Ratio, because why? It's the number of pages. 1, 2, 3, you get paid. 4, 5, 6, you get paid. 7, 8, 9, you get paid. Is it now fixed or variable ratio? Fixed, because it's exactly every third. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, and so forth. So that was a fixed ratio schedule. Any questions on any of that? That's way more review than I should have done, but I'm just feeling nice today. All right, so this is admittedly a strange set of pictures that we are going to explain this morning from research that was done by a guy named Albert Bandura. Let me spell out his name for you up top here. He was and still is up at Stanford doing this work. And the studies that he's most famous for are called, believe it or not, the Bobo doll studies. What's the Bobo doll? Well, it's this not inappropriate blow-up doll. Okay? So see him here? It's just one of these dolls that, like, if you punch it and it flops down, what does it do? Kind of pops right back up. Okay, you guys might have seen these somewhere. And he uses his Bobo doll studies to extract the 4 steps that he argues are part of doing any kind of observational learning. Before I get into the steps, let me explain to you why observational learning matters. Okay, how many of you guys have ever learned to do anything by watching someone else do that behavior? I'm teaching right now. I learned at the beginning how to teach by what? Watching other people teach, right? And seeing that for years and years. Okay, so this is really important stuff because there are a lot of things that we learn how to do by doing observational learning. So I'll extract the 4 steps and then we'll go back and talk about what he did in his studies to arrive at these findings. Bandura argues that number 1, for observational learning or the social learning to unfold, we have to, number 1, pay attention to what the model is doing. What's the model? Somebody strutting down the runway? No. In his study, it's the woman here dressed like your first grade teacher who's, well, she's beating up Bobo. And we'll look at an actual set of video clips of her and then the little boy and then the little girl. If you're going to learn from her, right, or let's put it in a real world context, if you're going to learn how to be a plumber by watching and being an apprentice plumber to someone who really knows what he's doing, well, the first thing you need to do is pay attention to what he's doing, okay? So if he is doing something to fix some broken pipes under a sink today on Tuesday, and you want to be able to do that same repair yourself on Friday, first of all, today, on Tuesday, you have to pay attention, okay? If you're not paying attention, you're playing Candy Crush or something stupid like that, then you're never going to be able to do this right when Friday rolls around. Number 2, you got to be able to hold on to that information in memory. Okay, so I saw him do it on Tuesday, and now when Friday rolls around, I can recollect what I saw him do. Okay, and it doesn't need to be plumbing. It could be teaching. It could be flying a jet airplane. It could be juggling. Okay, it could be doing some dance routine. It doesn't matter what the example is. Number 1, you have to pay attention. Number 2, you have to hold on to it in memory. So that's actually a nice segue into our chapter on memory in just a bit. Number 3, you have to be physically capable of doing what you saw them do. Okay? You have to be physically capable of reproducing those behaviors. Okay? This is where you may run up against it when you try to do observational learning of things you see them do on SportsCenter highlights. Like, yeah, I'm going to do what he did. I saw the dunk contest. I'm going to take off from the free throw line like that dude did, and I'm going to dunk. Not without a trampoline, I'm not. Right? Okay? So I'm not physically capable maybe of doing some of those behaviors. This is where some of this with kids you can run up against, right? They're not big enough or strong enough or they don't have the fine motor skills maybe to do some things that maybe you're trying to help them learn how to do. And then finally, Bandura says, there's got to be some kind of motivational fuel to make you want to do what you did. Now, obviously, if you're learning how to be a waitress or a teacher or a surgeon or a plumber or whatever, your motivation is, I'm going to get paid, right? If I get good at this, this is going to be my job, this is going to be my career, and I can make a good living. So this is where there's a little bit of overlap, I think, especially with the motivation here in step 4 between this and operant conditioning, right? Because many times, what's the motivation for doing what you're going to do? You're going to get some kind of reinforcement, right? So, if you learn how to do some kind of dance routine, people are going to like it so much they might clap, right? Or if you learn how to play a musical instrument really well, and I don't know, you're going to sit down in the subway and play, people might come and throw money in your case. There's the motivational fuel for that behavior, okay? So, what did he do in the original study? He did a number of permutations on the study, but one of the original forms of the Bobo doll study was one where Bandura had 3 groups of kids come in and observe the model. So they observed the woman, and we'll see her in the video in a minute, do different aggressive behaviors. In group number 1, when she got done doing the aggressive behaviors, the kids saw her get reinforced for doing so. They basically saw her get rewarded. The researcher came in and said, that was great. I don't think I've ever seen anybody beat up Bobo as much as you did. Well done. Here's your reward. Okay. Group 2 sees the same set of behaviors by the model. What do you think happens after she gets done doing it for the kids in group 2? They see her get punished. Okay. So we've got aggressive behaviors followed by reinforcement, aggressive behaviors followed by punishment. The third group, they see the aggressive behaviors, and what do they see afterwards? It's the control group. Even Siri knows. Okay? What does the control group see afterwards? Nothing. Right? So we've got reinforcement, punishment, or no consequences observed, and then we let the kids loose. And we'll see the videos of these 2 little guys here in just a minute. We see what they do when they go in there, and the dependent variable, right, the outcome variable here is who is going to be the most aggressive, group 1, group 2, or group 3? What do you guys think? Group 1 ends up being the most aggressive. Why? It's like, if I do this, I'm going to get rewarded. They gave her M&Ms. I like M&Ms. I'm going to go beat the hell out of that doll. I'll do that. Right? For some M&Ms, certainly I'll do that. Let's take a look at the video clips so you see some of this in action, and then we'll step back and say, what is this relevant to that you might be concerned about in the real world? So this is just on Launchpad. I'm within chapter 5 here. It's called Bandura's Bobo Doll Experiment. The first panel here just explains some of the basics that we've already talked about. Second panel shows the adult model's behavior. So let's see what this woman does that you observe as a participant in the study. So here she's in there with Bobo. She's hitting him in the nose with a hammer. Whew, Bobo doll he got up on that one. Okay, she throws him really high in the air. She's going to kick him. She's going to kick. Here we got air. When he got kicked, that's cool. She knocks him down. Oh, she sits on him, and she punches him in the face. Okay, so now you've just watched that. The question is, what are you going to do when you go in there? And what I want you to notice as you're observing the little boy and then the little girl is the fact that sometimes they're mimicking exactly what she did, right? And then sometimes they sort of do variations off of that, right? It's still aggressive, it's still violent behavior, but sometimes it's not like a copy and paste and they're doing exactly the same thing. Here's the little boy. He's punching. She did some of that. Oh, he didn't get it up in the air as much as she did. Kicking. Yep, we saw her do that. More kicking. Oh, now he's talking smack to Bobo. We did not see her do that. Hammer to the face. Right on the nose. That's a good hit. You don't want this kid to be in kindergarten with your kid. So he's swinging wildly. Haymakers, right? Oh, there's a thing where now he's sitting on him and hitting him in the face with the hammer. Now, she sat on him and punched at him in the face, right? Sort of playfully going at this. Okay. That's the little boy. The little princess here, this is my favorite part, right here. This is not Ronda Rousey as far as I know, but it may look that way to you. Here she goes, round one, in her Sunday best dress, right? Punching Bobo. Oh, she can't even lift him up. Because Bobo weighs more than she does. Oh. Oh. Here she is beginning a process of building a bomb. Okay, she's in the back cooking up the chemicals that are necessary. She's working on some of the electronics. She's plotting. Oh. Hitting him wildly with a hammer. Oh, Lord. I think Bobo tapped out. Oh, she's beating him with a doll, ironically enough. I just love, this is my favorite. Watch this at the end here. Here she goes, right over the top. So there she is, that sweet little princess doing all of that. So what's going on there? Well, they're paying attention to what they see the woman do. They're holding on to it. They're capable of doing not all of it, right? The little girl tries to do the throw him up in the air thing, but she doesn't really get him thrown up. That's sort of the physically capable piece. Why do we care about all of this? We care about this because there are connections we know between being exposed to different kinds of media violence and then being aggressive at some point in the future. So this little graphic here from the previous textbook shows on the x-axis media violence exposure time 1, low, medium, high exposure, plotting out the percentage of kids who were involved in fights at time 2. And basically what you see is especially obvious for boys, the green bar. The more exposure you have to violent, aggressive stuff in the media at time 1, the more likely you are to be aggressive and violent and get in fights later on. Okay? And by media violence, we would mean TV shows, movies, video games especially, I would say, especially given how much time kids spend doing this now. So this is a study published about 10 years ago. That's a correlational study. So just because we find an association between engagement with violent media and aggressive or violent behavior, does that mean that exposure is causing the aggressive behavior? No. You guys know enough now, especially after we hammered on this in the section on methods, that it could be causal, but we can't know until we do what kind of a study? An experiment would be the way that we would want to do this. Now, this is not an experimental design, so it makes me think, okay, so if it's not A causing B, right, we said correlation doesn't mean causation, let's think about third variables, because there are a lot of possible third variables here. That we've got kids exposed to high levels of media violence being more aggressive. What's going on down here that might be connected with both kids who play a lot of violent video games, let's say, and who are getting in a lot of fights at school? What else might be going on in their lives, at home, at school, in their neighborhood, let's say, that are connected with those two things that we did measure? Anybody have any ideas? What do you think might be going on? And don't all jump at once. Yeah?
They spend so much time in front of the screen and they lack social skills.
They lack social skills because they're spending so much time in front of the screen, and that's what's connected over here to them being aggressive towards other kids. They don't know how to solve interpersonal problems, right? Or their only mechanism to solve interpersonal problems is what they do in the video game, which is beat the hell out of somebody. Okay? Let's talk about parents. What role might the parents play here? If the parents are being violent themselves and the kids are seeing this in the video game, maybe it's these two together that are predictive of the kids being aggressive or violent themselves. We could go not even just with parents being aggressive, we could go with parents who are not doing something that's called parental monitoring, which doesn't mean the helicopter parent thing, but it means knowing what your kids are doing. Like, what is the video game that they're playing in there? Oh, I don't know, but it sounds like a lot of shooting going on, right? If they're not doing that, then that could be a problem. If the school is in a violent neighborhood, both at school and along the way, they're being exposed to a lot of violence. That could be a risk factor. Okay? The final one I'd have you think about is if we're talking about kids as they move through childhood and their teenage years, what part of their brain is still developing until they get into their 20s, that could be connected with getting into fights all the time? Frontal lobe, right? What does the frontal lobe do? I'm doing this pressing on the brakes thing, right? It helps you inhibit impulses. So maybe if I don't have full development of this part of the brain that helps me think through situations and not just decide to beat the hell out of somebody when I get angry, that's another factor, right? So again, I go back to the idea of the multivariate world, right? There's certainly some evidence that media violence exposure is not a good thing, but it's probably not the only thing. If kids are getting into fights all the time, it's probably unlikely that any kind of interesting outcome in psychology is produced by just one thing, right? There's probably a host of risk factors here that are all sort of working together to cause these problems. Any questions on that or anything on learning before we blow into the section on memory? We've got about 40 minutes to do a decent chunk of memory. All right, let's do that. So we'll move into the memory chapter here. It's the set of slides that are gray, these guys. And what I'm going to give you, again, is one of these advanced organizers and tell you that what we're going to do this morning is these first two things. Okay? We are going to talk about 3 or 4 different models of how memory works. And they're pretty straightforward, but they also give us a nice foundation as we go forward and do some demonstrations to understand what's going on in those demonstrations. We will do 2 demonstrations today before we're done. Both of them are about something called the serial position effect. Okay? It has to do with if I read you a list of words from, let's say, 1 to 30 words, which words are you going to be most likely and least likely to remember? It turns out that there's a pattern to that. Online on Thursday, we are going to begin with a demonstration of chunking, which sounds awful and gross. But chunking actually has to do with memory. Okay? And you have been doing chunking for years to make efficient use of your short-term memory. You probably just haven't ever called it this. We'll talk about what you've been doing with chunking for years at the beginning of class on Thursday. We'll do another demonstration online. I really like this one. It's called Levels of Processing. And it's directly relevant to your studying. It turns out that the depth to which you process information has a huge impact on whether you can recall it later from memory. Okay? If you do shallow, superficial reading of things and then you have a difficult, challenging test on that content, you're not going to do very well. Okay? I think this is actually the number one problem for students in this class, is that they develop a superficial level of understanding of things, and then I ask you test questions that make you analyze new situations, and you can't do it. Okay, because you don't do deep enough processing here at this levels of processing theory. I think it's actually one of the great things about SIs, because they make you do deeper processing. We'll talk about what goes wrong with memory. Very importantly, we'll take a look at a Finding Nemo video clip. Okay, and I know the new Dory movie's coming out. We're counting down the days in June. It's the day before my middle son's birthday. That's where we're going to celebrate his birthday. Why can't Dory remember anything? What is going on? We'll explain that. And then the biology of memory. So what parts of the brain are involved with memory? We're actually going to learn that, believe it or not, the cerebellum, which we said was muscle movement, coordination, and balance, actually plays a role related to memory that I left because you already had so much bio to worry about. But we'll talk about some other brain structures, including the hippocampus, which, not to give away too much, that's Dory's big problem, is hippocampal deficits. All right, so we're going to talk about these models of memory, beginning with this first one, where we talk about memory use. And basically the idea here is this is going to be a set of ideas related to how we get information out of memory. Okay, so the memory use part of the model here is about how did you pull that information out or retrieve that information from memory. If it's explicit memory, it's memory retrieval that involves effort. So I'm going to circle the E in explicit and the E in effort, because explicit memory involves trying to recall something. Okay? Let me give you an example of this. Okay? I want you to think for a second and try to recall the name of your first grade teacher. Okay? Now, some of you may remember, some of you may not. As you're trying to recall, here's what some of you will do. You'll do this. Because the answer's up on the ceiling, right? I actually use that as like a behavioral indicator. Like if somebody's using explicit memory, they might do this. Let me think for a second, right? I'll contrast that with what we call implicit memory, okay? If instead of asking you the name of your first grade teacher, if I just ask you what's your name, you're probably not going to go, hold on. Think for a second, I got this. Okay? It's going to be automatic, right? It doesn't involve any effort. I'll give you a different type of implicit memory example. Okay? If you look down right now, and assuming you've got shoelaces on your shoes and you're not a Velcro guy, if the shoe is untied and you need to tie it, you're not going to be like, okay, let me Google how to do that again, right? You're just going to do it, and you're done, right? If we rode a bicycle in here, and I said, just ride the bike around in circles around the front of the classroom here, you probably could do that without trying to think your way through it. So this is all about how we're pulling the information out, or it's about the memory process, okay? We're going to now cross this and sort of think about this in conjunction with what is it that you're pulling out of memory, okay? I've given you a couple different examples already. One is like a personal life event, the name of your first grade teacher. Another personal thing was your name, okay? Some, what we're going to call procedural memories, how to tie your shoe, how to ride a bike, okay? I could give you other types of things to try to recall. I could ask you, what was the name of the 26th President of the United States? Okay? Now, most of you are going to go this way with that one. Okay? And an explicit use of memory. I'm going to talk to you now about what those different memory types are called. So declarative memory is the overall category for memory for facts and events. And then what happens is we further subdivide it based on whether those facts and events are personal to you or not. Okay, so episodic memories are memories for personal events. I'm going to circle the two E's again. Episodes and events, episodic memory. And this is biographical stuff. Okay? So an episodic memory might be if I asked you, what was the name of the person that you took to your senior prom? This is like a theme after the picture at the end of last week, right? What was his name? What was her name? Okay? That's an episodic memory. It's about you. And we can contrast those kinds of memories with semantic memories that are memories for facts and meanings of words and concepts. So semantic memory is more generic. This is the way I think about semantic memory, is it's generic information that in the old days, that is like 10 to 15 years ago, you might have tried to retrieve by looking in a dictionary or in an encyclopedia. Okay? It's not about you, okay? But what you're going to do is try to track down this generic information. So who was the 26th president? Somebody looked it up, right? Theodore Roosevelt, right? I used the same number. I just grab a random president number, and that was the same one I used in the 8 o'clock class. I could give you another semantic memory to try to retrieve, and it's probably going to involve explicit memory for most of you. I could ask you, what's the capital of Pennsylvania? Harrisburg. I know that one because I grew up in Pennsylvania. Although, I do know a lot of the capitals again now. You know why? Because my 5th grader just had to memorize all of them. And I was in charge of studying with him, putting the Quizlets together. We're big fans of Quizlet. Okay? So that's semantic memories, right? Here's the interesting thing about semantic memory. You know what's happening in the age of Google here with semantic memories? What are we finding about what people know about these facts and words and other things? Do we know them as much as we used to know them? We're sort of efficiently offloading those, because when I ask you, like, what's the name of the 18th president, how long does it take you to find that online? Like that, right? So, I mean, it's not life-changing. It's not like you're going to get murdered or not based on whether you know the 18th president or not, right? So we offload those things, and then we know that we can use Google to sort of be that part of our memory store, and we can pull that stuff in. Okay? That's a big change in the last 15 to 20 years. It has implications for teachers. When I work with professors here at SDSU doing faculty workshops and stuff, I tell them, you're not valuable to your students because you know a lot of stuff, right? Because where is that stuff? You could find it in a second, okay? So the fact that I know that Wundt was the founder of psychology means almost nothing, okay? But the fact that I can talk about the different concepts related to classical conditioning and relate them to your lives, is that valuable to you? Absolutely, right? So that's what matters, right? It doesn't matter that you know a bunch of stuff as much anymore. Now, obviously, at some point, you need to know some stuff, right? You can't teach history if you're like, George Washington, no, never heard of him. Who's that guy, right? So you have to know something, but there is a change certainly going on here. Procedural memories was what I was talking about before with tying your shoes or riding a bike. Memories for how to do things, I think about these as skills or behaviors. Skills/behaviors. And I had a great question after class in the 8 o'clock section. And I shouldn't act so surprised, but I don't get a ton of great questions. This was a great question. A student came up and he said, could something like how to do a certain kind of challenging math problem potentially be a procedural memory? And I said, yeah, let's talk about it, right? We said, well, what about something like long division, right? Because what do you have to remember? Well, dividing in, putting the answer up top, multiplying that by the number out there, putting that number down below, subtracting it. You're doing a lot of things. So you could certainly say there are some things with more challenging kinds of math problems that maybe are procedural, right? I said, well, maybe something like, the set of steps involved in some geometric proof. That's another thing that's on my radar because my middle one is doing geometric proofs. That's procedural. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 steps in this specific proof. It's a procedural memory. Again, for what we're pulling out of memory is the focus here on memory content. So not on how we're getting it out. What I want to scribble on here is the focus here is on what is it that you're pulling out of memory. What are you retrieving? Okay? And oh, by the way, the reason we make these distinctions is not only does it make sense on sort of a logical level, but it turns out that there are different memory systems in your brain that are related to these different types of memories. Okay? So procedural memories, as I alluded to before, they end up involving your cerebellum. Okay? And episodic and semantic memories under the declarative store really involve the hippocampus more than anything else. Okay? So it's sort of reflected in the biology when we look at the way that we slice and dice these things. Questions on that? Everybody got it? Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yep. Biographical, yeah. So it's like your story from your life. So if I asked you, what was your address that you lived in when you were in 5th grade? That's the episodic memory, biographical sort of thing. Versus, some other generic thing. Who was the King of England in 1795 or something. That's a more generic semantic memory. All right, let me give you 2 easy clicker questions here. Try to give you 4 more points. How about this guy? Your recollection of how to use your clicker is an example of what type of memory, whereas your recollection of the stuff that happened back on day 1 of the semester is an example of what type of memory. So when you get one of these that's got 2 answer choices, go after the one that you know for sure, and you can use that to eliminate other possible choices. All right, we're good. We got about 10 more minutes of models to look at and then about 10 to 15 minutes of demonstrations. Alrighty. So almost everybody chose A and C because everybody knew that how to use a clicker is procedural. And then we got to go to the other one. Well, the other one is a personal life event. It's episodic. It goes directly back to your question. Okay? Good. How about this one? Remembering how to solve a jigsaw puzzle without any conscious recollection that you're doing that. What does that sound like? What kind of memory? Is that explicit, flashbulb, implicit, or sensory? And if you're paying attention, 2 of those types of memory I haven't even talked about. So That should help you eliminate things. Anybody get any emergency texts yet? No? All right. I'm relying on you guys now. All right. Let's let this run out. This is probably a big number. I like it. Good. So that is implicit memory because it's not involving conscious awareness. It's not involving effort. You're not sitting there saying, okay, let me think about how to put this together. You're doing things automatically like tying the shoes or whatever the case might be. Good. All right. 2 more models to take a look at before we do a couple demonstrations. This is an overview of memory processes that is really simple and straightforward. When we work with information in memory, initially we encode it, and then we store it away, and then we retrieve it later on at some point in the future. So the encoding stage is the initial processing of the information, okay? The initial processing of information that somehow leaves us with a trace, if you will, in memory. The way I think about encoding is it is the data entry stage. So if we run for a minute with a computer analogy for how memory works, we'd say, this is the data entry. This is me typing my paper that's due on Friday. It's me building the PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to do in class next Tuesday. I could be putting some numbers for a statistics class into an Excel spreadsheet. Whatever it is, all of those things would involve the encoding of information in the first place. And here's what I want to mention here, that one of the first things that can go wrong with memory is that you fail to encode the information in the first place. In fact, when we talk about things that can go wrong with memory on Thursday, we're going to end up talking about interference and amnesia and some interesting stuff. But the very first thing we're going to talk about is a lack of encoding. Imagine that you didn't encode the information on the front end. What happens when you try to retrieve it on the back end? Can you retrieve it? Why not? There's nothing there to retrieve, right? It's almost like you never did type in the paper or put the numbers into the Excel spreadsheet or whatever. You can't retrieve it later on if you didn't code it in the first place, okay? Real world example of that. How many new people did you meet for you guys who are first semester freshmen in the fall? How many new people did you meet back in August? A gazillion, right? Imagine during that first week, you're going to dinner one night and your friend who knows like everybody, she's introducing like 9 different people to you. And she tells you all their names. And you're not paying attention because you got a really high score in Candy Crush going on. Okay? 3 days later, you're walking across campus and one of those 9 people is coming towards you and they're like, hey, Susie, how's it going? You're Susie. And you're like, hey, you, right? Did you forget that person's name? No, you never stored it away. You never entered it into memory in the first place. You never encoded it. That's one of the things that could go wrong, right? If you're sitting here in class and not paying attention, when I ask you a test question, ironically enough, about encoding, you won't remember it, okay? Stage 2 is storage. You retain that information over time. Effectively, what you need here is the ability to save whatever it is that you've been entering into the software. Okay, we need a save button. Okay? This is where things go awry for Dory. She doesn't really have a save button for memory. Okay, so she's constantly living in the present moment. Okay? So that's the story of stage 2. Stage 3 is retrieval. It's the actual opening up and pulling back out of memory that which has been stored away. So I guess if I keep running with this analogy related to computer programs, we could do this is open. Okay, we pull it back out of memory, we retrieve it, and we can be tasked with doing retrieval in one of 2 ways. We could be given a recall task or we could be given a recognition task. Okay? There's a difference between them. A recall task is when you're asked to recall the information That is, retrieve the information with no specific cues given to you. Okay? So a recall task might be something like this. Let's say you were in a bank that was robbed, and you're now being asked to describe the perpetrator of the bank robbery to the police, and they have a sketch artist there. That's a recall task. Okay? What did he look like? What color was his hair? Did you notice anything noticeable about his face or whatever? That's a recall task. Okay? If you witness that same crime, and instead of having you do a recall task, maybe the police wanted you to do a recognition task, what would they ask you to do? What would you look at? A lineup, right? Now, can you recognize maybe 6 guys standing there, or maybe 6 pictures on a piece of paper? Which one of these is the guy that you saw do this? That's a recognition task. Okay? Generally speaking, which of those is easier to do well on? Recognition. Why? Because you got the answer in front of you, right? So when we do multiple choice tests, are they recognition or recall? They're recognition. Because all you have to do, I mean, I don't want to minimize this challenging, right? All you have to do is identify, there's 4 answers, which one is the right one. What kind of test questions would instead be recall? Fill in the blank without a word bank. What else? Short answers or essays. Could you imagine if I gave you guys essays? It would take me a year to grade them, right? But if I gave you an essay question that said, develop a new example of classical conditioning and use it to explain US, UR, CS, and CR. Go. I think I'd rather have the multiple choice, right? Because that sounds like a lot heavier lifting to do that recall task like that. All right, final model. Talks about the different types of memory stores that we have. Sensory memory is the least important one. It's this ultra short-term fleeting memory that lasts just a couple seconds or less. So we're not going to beat this into the ground because it's really not particularly important. But there are examples, for example, with respect to iconic memory that you might be able to hold on to here. So iconic memory means there's a fleeting trace in your memory, on the order of a number of seconds here, of something that you saw visually. The best example I could think of is when little kids are waving around the sparklers on the 4th of July. Right? And they're waving them around in a big circle, or maybe they're doing the infinity sign, right? I guess, or number 8 tipped over, right? And you see, it sort of looks like that's there. Or if I did it with the laser pointer here, right? It sort of looks like there's a circle on the screen. Is there really a circle on the screen? No, it's just that fleeting trace of this visual memory that we call an iconic memory. Okay? It could happen if you're at a concert and instead of your cell phone, you're using like a lighter and you're waving it back and forth. It looks like it's tracing a little line across the sky there. It's not. That's the iconic memory. You could have something similar for sounds, echoic memories. We're much more interested in short-term memory. Short-term memory includes working memory. Working memory actually refers to what's going on in short-term memory. So there's actually a distinction to be made between these two. I'll make a deal with you. I'm not going to ask you any test questions that say, which of these best explains the difference between short-term memory and working memory. I use the terms interchangeably. Okay? So it's processing information in short-term memory. And the key thing I want you to know about short-term memory is it has a limited capacity. Okay? You cannot hold on to everything that you're exposed to in your short-term memory. So if I just verbally said to you right now, here are the 35 things that I want you guys to pick up from the grocery store on the way home. Are you going to remember 35 items? No. How many are you going to remember? Well, that's actually what we're going to talk about at the beginning of class on Thursday. It's more than 0, but less than 35. Okay? And there's a magic number that's somewhere in there that most people will be able to hold on to. The only way we can make better use and longer and have longer retention of information in short-term memory is to rehearse that information. Okay? So if I said to you, I need you to pick up apples, bananas, carrots, and I'm making it really easy because I just did ABC, right? You could hold on to those things by going apples, bananas, carrots, apples, bananas, carrots, apples. And now I'm at item number 25. You're like, apples, bananas, carrots, right? I'm rehearsing that. I can hold on to that longer because I'm doing that rehearsal in memory. And then finally, long-term memory. What's really cool about long-term memory is it has nearly unlimited capacity. Okay? You don't get to the point with long-term memory where you're like, well, you know, Johnny, I'd really like to remember your name, but if I remember your name, I'm going to have to forget what happened at my sister's wedding 3 years ago because the disk is getting full for memory, and I don't want to lose that memory, so I'm not going to remember your name, Johnny. Okay? We don't ever have that happen, right? It's not like with the cell phone, like, oh, I shot too many videos that are too long, and now I got to delete some because I'm running out of space, right? We don't run up against that with long-term memory. It's a gazillion, bazillion terabytes or whatever, okay? Everybody see the difference across those different types of memory store? We'll talk more about short-term memory, especially when we get together on Thursday online. All right, I want to do, this is just some weird, whatever, doesn't matter. I'm going to do 2 demonstrations with you guys in our last 15 minutes here. So put down your pens and pencils and so forth. Here's what I'm going to do. You guys are going to be quiet, and I'm going to read you a list of words. When I'm done reading you the list, I'm going to tell you guys to do something. All right? This could be the highlight of your day. Here we go. Demonstration number 1. House. Table. Planet. Lion. Mint. Calendar. Print. Dust. Rose. Drawer. Refrigerator. Maple. Help. Monument. Plastic. Band. Basket. Towel. Okay. Try to write down as many words as you can from that list I just read you. There were 18 words. I'll give you guys a minute to do that. Do it quietly. Alrighty. Here's the list. First thing you can do is come up with your grand total because I know you're curious to see what that is. So see how many out of 18 you remembered. Don't give yourself credit for words that you wrote down that I did not say. Okay. Let's see how many you come up with out of 18. The point of this demonstration is actually not going to be about that grand total. It's going to be about which words you're more or less likely to remember. That's where we're going to go with this. But let's start with the grand total. How many of you guys had 9 or more? Keep hands up as we go. 10 or more. 11 or more. 12 or more. 13 or more. Who else still has a hand up? Raise them high if you got them up still. Okay, in the back. Okay, 14 or more. 15 or more. Anybody have 15 or more? Wave it high. How many people had 14 or more? Wave your hand around a little bit. Well, Ann is hearing the list for the 3rd time because she's an SI leader, so she's kind of cheating. But you had how many? 14? Okay. Did you do anything in particular to try to remember 14?
I was trying to picture all of the items.
I could have made $1 million by telling you guys I know what he's going to say. Okay, that's the answer every time. Tried to picture something that pulled in all the different words together. Okay, that's not the point of demonstration. Here's the point of demonstration. How many of you guys remember the word house? Raise your hand real quick. Look around. That's about 90% of you guys. Okay, some of you never raise your hands no matter what I ask you to do. How many of you guys remember the word drawer in the middle there? Usually that number, if I use the clickers to get the number, it's about 25 to 30 or 35%. Okay, so a lot of you remember house, not many remember drawer. Let's go to the last word. How many guys remember towel? Usually that number crops back up to about 50% or so. Here's the point of the demonstration. All the demonstrations here have a specific point. This one is to show you something called the serial position effect. I'm going to make it red on the graph here. Trust me, you guys, typically the number for data point number 1 is about 90. The middle word in a list is usually about 20-some%, maybe something in here. And the last word is usually about 50% or so in here. It's this sort of tipped over U-shaped curve. Here's the deal. The serial position effect has two components. The first component is called the primacy effect, and that's what's shown on the left side of the graph. Okay? The graph is showing you your likelihood of recalling the word as a function of where it is in the list. Basically, the primacy effect is you remember things at the beginning of the list really well. What was the first word again? House. Some of you still remember it without even maybe looking down at your word list. Okay? Tell me, how did you remember house so well? What did you guys do with house to hold on to that? Somebody say repeat it. Is that what I heard? You were repeating it to yourself. So you're doing what we call rehearsal. Here's what you likely were doing as this was unfolding. You probably were sitting there going, house, table, planet, lion, house, table, planet, lion, house, table. And I'm like saying rose and drawer. You're like, no, no, no. House, table, planet, lion. That's what I got. Like, I'm still jamming that in there. Hold on. Stop giving me more words. House, table, planet. Okay. So you remember that stuff at the beginning because you're rehearsing it. What about the words at the end? The last word was what? Towel. Band, basket, towel was the last word. Why did you recall that? Well, it's the last word on the list. And what did that word feel like as you tried to recall it versus other words? I'm going to guess that the word that's in some of your minds right now is that word was fresh in memory. How many of you guys sort of thought it was kind of fresh in my memory? Okay, no one's raising their hands. Thank you for at least helping me out a little bit. Okay, so it was fresh in memory because it's still in your short-term memory. Here's the way I like to think about memory in this regard. Memory is kind of like a train station, and what we just did was we ran a bunch of train cars by, each of which had a word on it. House, table, planet, lion, all the way through band, basket, and towel. And the last train that went through was towel. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember towel because it just went by. Right? It's fresh in my memory. That's the first demonstration. We have 7 minutes to do the second demonstration. I want to see what's going to happen when we do something a little bit different with a second list of words here. Okay, so I want you to put your pens and pencils down again. We're going to do a second demonstration, and then we're going to be done. All right, here's word list number 2. Pickle, disc, lighter, pen, stable, highway, mountain, outlet, tire, ash, handle, sink, pool, apple, bird, fence, chair, play. Okay, before you do the retrieval, let's do this. Let's count backwards from 30 out loud together. Oh, you really hate me now. Here we go. 30, 29, 28, 27, 26, 25, 24, 23, 22, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, hey, good luck. All right, try to write down as many as you can remember. Do it by yourself. Do it quietly. Okay, so here's the list for demo number 2. I'm going to bet, first of all, that not many people are going to get into the teens out of these 18 words. But here's what I'm most interested in. Let's do a quick survey, and you could come up with your totals just in case you're curious. But how many guys remember the word pickle this time around? Look around. That is still a huge number remembering pickle, like remember the word band. Let me ask you one other word. How many guys remember the word play? Look around. It's like 10 people. Okay, so something happened here where your recall of pickle stayed intact. Your recall of the first word stayed intact, but whatever I did to you ruined what was going on with that last word. This demonstration is showing you that the recency effect is not evident if there's a delay and or interference. In English, here was your first demonstration in red. Here is the second demonstration in blue. What happens with the curve here in the second demonstration? What happens at this point? It flattens out. So what happens is your recall of that last set of words, those last few words, is not very good. Why? Why did you remember them the first time? What did we say? They were fresh in memory. Were they fresh when we counted backwards from 30? Not so fresh anymore, right? So that's what the second demonstration was about. We will pick up with a demo on Thursday about the capacity of your short-term memory. How many pieces of information can you remember? See ya.